gonna start trying. And he said to me, well, what do you think about adopting first? And I said, no.
Catherine said no at first. And she didn't say no to adoption, she said no to adoption first. She wanted to have a biological child first. And I just prayed, Lord, if this is what you want us to do, then you'll move my wife's heart.
Rachel and BJ had previously adopted from China, and every once in a while she would put pictures up on Facebook of these kids that needed to be adopted. I saw this picture of this little girl in China who had medical needs, and all of a sudden I was like, we have to adopt her.
About 3 weeks later is when she brought it up to me. She had a caveat, though, that I was surprised at. It was, what do you think about adopting a medical needs child? And that I wasn't prepared for.
We went through the process of trying to adopt her, and we eventually found out we couldn't, but that really opened me up to, all right, I'm ready.
Both of us got hit with something that we weren't expecting.
We had 3 kids at that time. We had Eliana, Janae, and Simeon. And we knew we'd have more at some point.
A couple of my friends I'd gone on missions trips with, all of a sudden were adopting, and I'm following their blog, and they're doing international adoptions, and I'm following along. I'm like, they've got young kids. Like, they're adopting when their families are still young.
Rachel had mentioned this girl that needed to get adopted, and out of my mouth came, maybe we should be thinking about this. What was that?
And I was kind of expecting him to be like, you're nuts. We have 3 young children. And he didn't. He's like, oh, maybe we should pray about it.
It wasn't that girl, and it wasn't that time, but it was time.
So we had our 3 biological children, and then we started talking about adoption.
We looked into China, didn't feel like God was really pulling our heart towards China. Looked into some countries in Africa as well, didn't really seem to fit. Definitely felt a pull towards Haiti, and our church was doing mission work with Haiti. And
Looked at Haiti's guidelines. We met none of them. We hadn't been married long enough. We weren't old enough. We had biological children. We did not meet their requirements at all. And then one night, found out I was pregnant. So we said, okay, this is God saying it's not time yet. When Anna was, I think, 3 or 4 months old, we started looking into adoption again, and Haiti had changed their laws. And we now met the requirements to adopt from Haiti. God's like, here, now it's time.
so that was cool. Awesome. I mean, amazing. Nothing that we could have ever planned or thought up.
We very quickly narrowed it down to China, and BJ still wasn't like 100% like, we should do this now. He was like, I don't know how this works. Like, I want to talk to their family. So we went and talked to our friends who were very similar in terms of income. They had a bigger family than ours, and they were adopting. So how'd you do this? And they just said, God provided. And that's what we kept seeing. People were like, don't let the money get in the way. If God's telling you should adopt, then you should do it, and don't let money be the reason you say no, because God can provide that. That's not hard for him to do. We applied with our agency right after Christmas. We sent in our application of 2011.
Every country, we either weren't old enough, or we didn't make enough money, or we hadn't been married long enough. So that was out of the question, really, to adopt from any other country but the US. So we picked Bethany Christian Services because I remembered that they were the agency that we would send women at the pro-life center that I worked at to. We were trying to get out of debt, and we were like a third of the way there when we decided to start this process. And I'll never forget, I was at work, and this one woman said to me, "That's crazy. Why would you adopt when you can probably have a kid biologically? Isn't that so expensive?" And I looked at her and I said, "God will provide." And that same day, I got an email from someone who said, "I will give you $15,000 and you use it whenever you're ready."
We were doing our home study, and we had to come up with the rest of the home study money, and we were short, I want to say it was close to $800. And a friend, she handed me a check on Mother's Day for the exact amount I needed. I opened it up in the car, and I just started crying. I couldn't believe it. And it was Mother's Day of all days to provide the money I needed to continue going. And that's kind of when I was like, all right, I know you got this, God. You've got the finances. It's going to be fine. When the money was needed, that's when God said, here you go. Not before, though. So it was a little stressful. I kind of had to keep trusting that God was going to keep providing the money as we needed it.
And meanwhile, I'd been on their agency page pretty much daily looking at the waiting children. And there was this one picture that kept coming up from November. Every time I clicked on that page, I would see her picture, and I would click on it. And I'd look at the needs, and I was like, oh, no. Like, it's too much, because the needs that were listed were mild hydrocephalus, CP, and poor brain development. So I would quickly close out and be like, nope, stop clicking on that picture. You know what this one is. Come on. So I closed out, and that night I was like, BJ, I just want you to look at our agency's page. Like, just look at the pictures. I just want you to, he's like, why? I've looked at these pictures. And I'm like, no, just look, is there any picture that's standing out to you?
And I had looked at it plenty of times, and just does any of these faces just grab you? And I went to the seat thinking, no. And I scrolled up and down, and I just said, well, actually, now that you mention it, I guess that little girl's been staring me down since about November, and apparently it'd been staring her down too.
He just goes, I don't see a reason not to move forward with this. And he's like, I think this is our daughter. And I'm like, I'm sure it's our daughter. When you actually read the file, it was like, well, no, she was crawling at 9 months. I'm like, well, if you're crawling at 9 months, you can walk. And the mild hydrocephalus, I'm looking at her pictures and I'm going, I don't see it. So we contacted CHOP, and they reviewed her file for us, and we had like a 2-hour conversation on the phone with the doctor, who basically painted what would be the worst scenario. Like, she could potentially need lifelong care. She could potentially never be independent. We're like, that's okay. Like, at that point, it was like, no, this is our girl. You're not going to tell us anything that's going to stop us. You're not.
We had a feeling we might get pregnant during this time. Friday, so it was Tuesday, we locked in with Liliana. Friday, we had a multiple home pregnancy tests. That's where we had blue sticks, we had double lines, we had all kinds of stuff that said, no, yeah, really.
Which was not in the plan. I mean, we knew since adoption could take like a year, we knew it was likely we would get pregnant sometime in that process.
Both of us were wondering if we heard God right. Did we mess up? Did we make a mistake? We really struggled that whole day with, what is going on?
We went over to my parents' house for dinner that night, and my grandfather lived with them at the time. We walked in, and he handed me a check for $5,000. He didn't have $5,000 to just throw out. And he goes, this is to go get my granddaughter from China. I started to cry. And I was like, because we had gone over really questioning, like, maybe we didn't hear God right, maybe we're supposed to wait. And it was like, God just kind of was like, nope, I'm still in this.
Rachel showed that to me. And it was one of those moments where you could hear God's voice, just God saying, I'm in this still. I said do this, and here's the proof. Now go.
We landed on Lifeline Children's Services in Alabama. We said, we really feel God calling us to adopt, and from Haiti, we want to get the process started. And we said, the other thing is we really feel called to adopt a deaf child. And they're like, a deaf child? If that's what God's calling you to do, that's fine. It doesn't happen often through our agency, but I said, that's okay. I said, you will find one. Don't worry. I said, I said, this is what God wants us to do. You're the agency. It's going to happen,
One of the directors from our agency was in California at a conference, and there was a woman from another agency there at that conference, while our social worker was in Alabama, and we're here in Pennsylvania. And at the conference, these two women, our director and the director of another agency, met and started talking, and the woman from the other agency mentioned that they had this little girl, and they were just desperate trying to find her a home, and she was deaf, and nobody wanted to adopt her because she was deaf. And our director just all of a sudden thought of us and said, I have a family who has requested to adopt a deaf child. God just put all the people in the right place at the right time to connect us with our now daughter.
God's hand is so big and can just work out these little details for the people to be in these places at the right time. You're like, wow.
We should have never found Abby.
We got the email about this little girl.
A friend of ours saw it and sent the picture to Catherine via Facebook message. 5 minutes after it was posted, the woman was informed by the agent, take it down. So within 5 minutes, her profile's taken down. But during those 5 minutes, this woman happened to find it, sent it to Catherine. Catherine looked at it, sent it to me, and we said yes.
Abby's birth parents came to America to have her because of the one-child policy that was still in effect in China last year. And they already had an older child, so their plan was, we're going to come to America, we'll have her, she'll be a U.S. citizen, we won't have to pay the fines in China. Abby was born at the 9-month mark. There was nothing weird about that. Perfectly normal delivery. And at 24 hours of life, became very sick. And thankfully, one of the more prestigious metabolic doctors worked at the hospital she was born at and knew right away from some of the symptoms what she was thinking Abby might have. And so she expedited some of the tests, and that doctor was right. And Abby has methylmalonic acidemia, which is a genetic disorder where one of the chromosomes on her DNA does not work, and that one doesn't make the enzyme to break down protein. Her body freaks out, doesn't know what to do with it, stores it, and in the storing process it builds up acid levels in the body that can become toxic and lead to seizures, strokes, death. Thankfully, this doctor figured out what was going on and was able to stabilize her. She knew that there wasn't anything in China, and she did a ton of research, called doctors in China, called hospitals in China, trying to find a way for this baby to go back with them. And there wasn't. They were given, you take her and you try your best. You try and move to America and live here. You put her in a medical foster care and hope that there's a way you can move here and get her, or you need to place her for adoption. And you're telling this to parents who just 48 hours ago delivered a perfectly, what they thought, healthy baby, and now they're being told, this child's going to die if you take them back.
Jing and Wei really wanted to pick the family before they had to go back to China.
Jing and Wei's visas were gonna run out.
They came over, we spent a few hours talking, and we sat, right here in this living room.
And Dave and I didn't know at the end of it if they were gonna choose us, but as they were leaving and walking out, Wei, the birth father, said, "Can we show you some pictures of her?" And we said, "Yes, we'd love to see pictures of her." And so he showed us on our phone, and then as he was getting ready to leave, he gave both of us a hug, which again is very countercultural for them. And he said, "We're family now. We're family now."
Here they are making one of the biggest decisions of their life. We're making one of the biggest decisions of our life. We're total strangers, and we're going to be raising a child that they gave birth to.
They have you come and meet the child, and a social worker from Haiti interviews you while you're there to make sure that you are a good match. And it also gives the parents a chance to decide, is this the right fit for our family?
They call it a socialization visit, so it's basically for us to meet with her, bond with her, and ultimately that trip leads to us accepting or denying the referral. So there's no way we were denying it. We knew that for sure.
There's a lot of paperwork that happens in that time, immigration paperwork that has to happen too on the U.S. side, passports, visas.
They were a great 2 weeks. It was hard being away from our biological kids because it was the first time that we had left all 4 of them.
She arrived at the orphanage just before she turned 4. She was with her mom until then. Her mom just didn't have the means to take care of her anymore and decided, the best thing for my child right now is that I find someone else. And not because her mom didn't love her. Her mom obviously loved her. She kept her for 3 years, almost 4.
I remember very clearly opening up this door, and she was like maybe 15 feet away from us, just standing there waiting, looking at us, and then just puts her arms up like that. And it was like, tear, just nonstop, It was just, and Joel picked her up and held her for 10 minutes. I'm like, come on, can I get a turn? To finally meet her and realize, okay, this is gonna happen. She's coming home with us. Not that trip, but here's a good push forward in the process for sure.
It was a year from when we met her to when we got to bring her home, which that was probably the hardest thing ever.
That was awful. I mean, it was just you just wait for an update, and there are just months that go by where you don't hear anything.
So that year, let's see, we decided to adopt. We got pregnant. I got a new job. And it's like, okay, and now I'm going to leave for like a month.
at that point, we had decided that my mom would travel with BJ. They flew out and went to Beijing.
We were in Beijing for like 3 days, got to meet all these other families, all hopeful, all excited. So that week, you traveled to the city where your child was at that point, or at least the province where your child was. And then the next day was our day to actually get her. And I remember looking at a map and realizing this is the closest I had been to Liliana ever.
So then they had gotcha day, and I knew gotcha day was normally in the morning. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna stay up. Like, we have to Skype as soon as we get back to the hotel.
We're all excited. We all got our, bags of goodies and the stuff you're gonna bring and all. And everyone, do you have your paperwork? Do you have your paperwork? Do you have your paperwork? Is your camera charged? We all traveled to government-run place that we're gonna get to pick up. First kid comes in, and everybody's camera's out. Everybody's crying. You got all these families now with their kids. There's 5 of us who haven't gotten our kids yet. Our guide, just being a good guide, said, okay, well, we have 2 buses here, so why don't we load all the families up, and they'll get their kids in a couple of minutes, hour or whatever, and they'll come back. And one of the fathers just was like, I don't know about you all, but I'm staying. And they were here for us, we want to be here for them. So everybody stayed. And we just waited and waited and waited forever. And poor Rachel is back here, roughly 12 to 13 hours difference.
It's getting later and later and later, and finally at like 12, 1 o'clock, I was like, I can't stay up anymore. Like, sent BJ a message on Skype, and I was like, please call me and keep calling if I don't wake up.
And there must have been minivan after minivan after minivan that drove up to that facility with no kids in them, but looked like that could be them. And then finally, it was them. And suddenly she wasn't a picture. She was there. We got into the hotel, and then we set up whatever technology I had, and we Skyped home for Rachel.
And the screen popped up, and there was my little girl. Playing we'd seen pictures, and you can see pictures, but it's not real. To see her with BJ and my mom, it was like, wait, she's really here. Like, it's real. And then I kind of did what every newborn mom does, where they're like checking the fingers and toes, and I'm like, so what about this? What about this? Have you checked this? What is it?
Mom and I got to go with Liliana to every one of her places. So found her what they call finding place. This is the place where her parents had abandoned her. It's a corner, very busy intersection, in front of a very nice hotel, some luxury apartments, a busy storefront across the other street. This isn't a back alley where someone's trying to get away with something and somebody doesn't like this kid. This is a populated area that is filled with fairly well-to-do people who can afford to stay at this hotel or live in those apartments. This parent wanted this child found and taken care of. So those parents might have just been staring at medical bills they knew they couldn't afford. So you don't get mad at mom or dad. You get mad at a culture and a society where that has to be a reasonable option for survival. But then you have to not get mad at just the society, because it's really sin. And the only answer to that is Jesus.
For 8 years, she was raised by somebody else. She doesn't know who we are, for the most part.
It's been a whole year. Are they going to remember? We sent pictures and videos with other families, and she seemed like she was still remembering who we were. The other children, they try to prepare them. Mom and Dad are coming, and I don't know how she knew. No one could tell her, but she knew. She knew it was time, and she was thrilled. She came running to me. She didn't forget who we were. She knew who we were. So Haiti is now part of the Hague Convention, and somehow we ended up being the first family to get all the way through the process. They had a nice ceremony for us at the embassy when we went to pick up her paperwork, her visa and her passport and all her exit paperwork to bring her home. And they had a little ceremony with cake, and it was one of those official ceremonies. They had the flags and the backdrop. Like, it was very official. So we had a gathering at our church where a bunch of family and friends came.
Which was fantastic. You know, it was so cool to see some friends and family all there to support us and welcome her home.
Of course, poor Angeline, she probably thought every day was cake with her new family. We had cake the first day, we had cake the second day, we had cake the third day. And she's gonna think that, like, all we do is eat cake.
So the adjustment period for her coming home, the kids did great. The kids were fantastic.
We're very lucky. They've done really, really well.
The lack of communication is probably the hardest part. Like, if she knew Creole or if she knew some sign language or something, or if she knew written.
She had a tutor, but she didn't really pick up a lot from the tutor. And no one else in the orphanage signed, so even if she did learn it, there was no one to use it with.
You know, to try and explain to her when she has no language what's going on, or what, you know, what she can and can't do, what's going to hurt her, what's good for her, what's bad, you know, those kind of things with no language. You know, when you're trying to teach language at the same time, it's a difficult process. So many people will say, oh, you know, she's so lucky to have you guys. To say that she's lucky, we're the lucky ones to have her, for sure. For her to be ripped from her home, for her to be dropped at an orphanage, for her to be ripped from the only country and place that she's known for the last 4 years and brought here. I don't think that's easy on her. You know, absolutely not. That's not a lucky situation. If she was lucky, she'd have had parents that brought her up, you know, raised her in a nice, wealthy home, in a Christian home. That's lucky.
From when we said yes till we signed papers, I think it was 3 weeks. And all of a sudden, we thought we'd have months. Because typically you can a lot of times you'll follow the birth mom from when she makes the decision at like maybe month 5, month 6. So you get to build that relationship for 3 months. We got one visit.
The agency that they had chosen to use is in New York. So they had to go all the way to New York and sign relinquishment papers. And when you sign relinquishment papers for New Jersey, their rights are terminated immediately. So they both signed. So they both were saying, we are no longer her parents. And then that was Tuesday morning, and Jing and Wei couldn't see Abby again after that. And so they called us and they said, we'd like to meet you at the hospital. And we met them in the lobby, and they gave us a little pack of things that were left for Abby, and it was pictures that Emma had drawn, her older sister, of her mom and dad. And then they gave us hugs, and they told us where she was in the NICU. And then they held hands and they ran. They just left. And that was really hard. Because they were trusting people that they'd met twice, that were gonna go up and take care of their little girl.
And I remember holding her for the first time. She was so tiny, and it was what a special moment that was. And I said to Kat, I was like, can we kiss her now? And it was just weird to think, like, this is our baby, and we can kiss her whenever we want, and we can tell her we love her, and that I'm her daddy, and this is her mommy. It was weird holding her in the NICU, but it was still awesome.
So Abby was in the NICU when we met her, and she spent another week in the NICU before we actually brought her home. So Dave and I were up there, either one of us or both of us, every day until she came home. As much as I want to say that those first few moments were me bonding and falling in love with this little baby, they weren't. It was me a lot of times being the nurse. Dave bonded with her way faster than I did. There were some moments where things were starting to get more difficult with Abigail. She wasn't eating as well, and I was becoming very frustrated. And I remembered sitting there thinking, I'm frustrated because the nurse in me wants to fix this, but the mommy in me doesn't know how. And when you start to fall in love with them and you become mom, then you realize I can't play both jobs anymore. One has to go. And it was her first hospitalization that we had. And You can't stop the pain. You know that she has to have an IV, and you just have to sit and watch them poke and poke and poke. And you hold them and you try to comfort them, but you can't because they're in pain. And the nurse can take care of this. The nurse can do all that, but mom can't. That's when I was like, all right, I'm mom. I'm not a nurse. I'm her mom. And it makes your faith in God so much bigger because you know he's holding her when I can't. And that's hard. And those are the parts of the mom that I kept trying to stuff because I was the nurse.
They were supposed to come home February 9th. February 8th, there was a giant snowstorm. And they were diverting like all the planes from Newark, and there were people in China who were like changing if they were going to fly now to Chicago or to whatever other, like there were people changing travel plans because Newark was going to be like buried in like 17 plus inches of snow.
So we didn't know where we're gonna get to Newark. We get into the air. When we got to a point where I knew we were closer to home, the little mileage was closer home than there. I'm like, okay, so we're gonna go home. I felt a lot better. And you know, it was long. Hour 10, I think it was. She puked. So the last 5 hours we're dealing with that smell, that wetness, that everything, and the change of clothes you have available to you is limited. Well, we dried her up, toweled her up, everything else.
Loaded up, went on the train, walked forever through Newark, and they'd made this big welcome home sign that we'd made, and so then we're waiting, and I'm like, okay, their flight landed, like it can't be that long.
Took a while to go through customs.
I think we waited for more than an hour.
Found a nice family bathroom and cleaned ourselves all up.
And they walked in. Everyone was like, Daddy! Like everyone just kind of dove at him, and
We got to see each other for the first time in 17 days. And first time ever for everybody else, for Liliana.
Liliana was kind of like in shell shock. It was a lot. She had just spent 2 weeks with my mom, and she adored my mom. Me, not so much. And I was like, okay, it'll just take some time. Like, we'll get there. You know, as babies grow, they exercise different parts of their brain. When they're interacting with caregivers, they're using these parts of their brain. It's growing those parts of the brain. And when you have a child who hasn't had their needs met, who have cried and no one's come, who makes funny faces and no one smiles back, who like doesn't get that eye contact, that adoring, you're special, you're loved, you're cherished. The only part of their brain that gets exercised is the amygdala, which is like the fight, flight, freeze, survival brain. And so the reaction to anything, their brain perceives it as a threat. So mommy giving me a hug, it's still a stiff board. She'll let me give her hugs now, she didn't used to. She'll let me give her kisses now. She'll say, I love you, mommy, which took a long time getting for speech reasons and for emotional reasons. And when she said it, I literally was just like, I was in shock. I was like, did I just hear that? And she said it again, and I was like, oh my gosh, I love you too. Like, it was so rewarding to finally hear that. I love you. But there's still that fear, because if I let someone in, I could lose them. And I can't survive that level of hurt again. So I have to protect my heart. And I protect my heart by keeping you at bay. You open up your heart to someone and then they hurt you. And you open your heart and they hurt you. And you open your heart and they hurt you. And eventually you're like, I'm not opening my heart anymore. But God doesn't do that to us. Because like the number of times I've hurt God, probably way more times than any of my children combined have hurt me. But he doesn't say like, okay, I'm done. And it's kind of a tough way to learn that lesson, but a very effective way to learn that lesson. I have said this over and over. This is hands down the hardest thing I've ever done. Hands down. There's no questioning God wanted her in our family. I can't question that. That's so obviously been answered over and over again. but it's also forced me in so many ways to rely on God more.
Adoption's hard, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's difficult.
It's tough on your faith. It's tough on your marriage. It's tough on your parenting. That's why you don't do it unless Jesus said to do it.
Don't just jump off the cliff because everybody else is. Make sure you're prepared.
God has such a heart for the orphans, such a heart for orphans. I mean, he's commanded us to take care of them. That doesn't mean everyone has to adopt, but we are commanded to take care of them.
And even if you don't feel called to adopt, you can support.
Give money. Support someone. Love them. This isn't something just to kind of go into, this would be nice. No, it wouldn't. This is ministry.
And it's like anything in life. When God has called you to do it, he will provide whatever it is that you're going to need. But he's not going to show it to you all up front. And I love the verse that says, your word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. If you stay in God's word, he's going to show you enough for you to take the next step. But that's it.
Don't worry about the numbers. And I say that tongue in cheek because even if we talked about our second adoption that we want to do, I started getting apprehensive about the numbers again. I'm like, why am I worrying about this? God's already proved his faithfulness, 30,000 times over by providing every penny we needed.
You never know what God can do. I only wanted 2 kids. We have 5. So obviously God changed my heart on that. So, he can clearly stir within us.
It's a blessing. I mean, totally a blessing. See God's hand at work through the whole thing. It's a struggle. It's absolutely a struggle. It's not easy, but it's worth it. It's worth it.
It would mostly be redundant. This video was fantastic, and it's so wonderful to see the heart of these 3 families. I myself am an adoptive father. To not steal the show, it's not necessary to tell my story. Their story was so powerful. It was so encompassing of how adoptions can work. And I love the testimony and the heart that was expressed this evening. So I'm going to skip my journey to getting to adoption. I want to touch on a few things that were mentioned this evening. One, if God wants you to go through the adoption process, the money is inconsequential. He will make that take place. He will supply all of your needs. And while it may be a really big number on paper to you, it's a insignificant, completely insignificant number to God. And so yes, the process of adoption can seem expensive to us as humans, but to God, all things are possible. He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, and I've heard it seems like every single way that God could provide, He has done it, and it's fascinating. Even in my story, God provided, and He took care of it. I was actually laid off when we started our adoption process. So God works out all the details. And so Bethany Christian Services is an international agency. Here in the United States, we are the largest adoption agency in the U.S. We have over 100 offices in the United States, and we do orphan care and family preservation services around the world. We are most commonly known for being an adoption agency. That is what people know us as. The irony to me is that the amount of kids we impact at Bethany through adoption makes up about 3% of all the children we impact worldwide. We do so many different ministries, from foster care to adoption, 3 different kinds of adoption, actually 4. And we have post-adoption services. Anybody who's adopted in the state of Pennsylvania is eligible to receive free post-adoption services through the statewide adoption network. We have pregnancy counseling. We have refugee services. We have a ministry called Safe Families for Children, which is really designed to help children who might end up in foster care in the future, preventing that from ever needing to take place before the abuse or neglect takes place. And so all of these programs really are designed to bring families together and keep families together. We also have pregnancy counseling. And so at Bethany, we are, yes, we do adoptions, yes, we do these wonderful programs, but our heart is about the kids. We really seek to bring children into a loving home. That's our goal, not seeking to have families who want kids be able to get kids. We want to make sure that kids have families, and that's our number one goal at Bethany. So what I want to do this evening is just kind of spell out a little bit of the differences, kind of explain to you how our adoption programs work, what they are at Bethany. We'll be having some refreshments afterwards. I'll certainly be glad to answer any questions you might have as well there. But our 3 adoption programs, we have our domestic infant adoption. And we had one of the families tonight in the video did the domestic infant program technically. And that is traditionally where you will have a child or a mom who finds out she's pregnant, and then she will decide somewhere along the lines that she wants to create an adoption plan. And so she'll work with our counselors at Bethany Christian Services, and we'll encourage her to make the decision that's best for her. We want to be non-coercive. We want to make sure that she makes a good and counseled decision. The best decision for her in most instances is for her to parent. And so very few number of the moms that come to us actually create an adoption plan. We want to counsel them to parent if that's at all possible. She will then create an adoption plan. Part of that process is selecting an adoptive family. So she'll get books and get to read about different adoptive families. And she will ultimately, she and the father oftentimes, will get to choose the adoptive family. That can look a lot of different ways. It can be a very open adoption where they've got lots of interaction, and after the baby is born, and they're able to essentially bring in an extra family member into their family. It can be a semi-open, which is where they may not have a face-to-face relationship, but they've got a email-to-email relationship, male-to-male relationship, and they can connect that way. Or it could be a closed adoption, where she decides that she wants to create the adoption plan, and then she doesn't want to have interaction with the family or the child after that. At Bethany, we strongly suggest that families consider doing an open or at least a semi-open adoption plan. It's very healthy for the child to be able to have that open relationship between birth mom and adoptive parents as well. So that is the first type of adoption, the domestic infant adoption. Secondly, we have foster care adoption, which is children who have been in foster care. The primary goal of foster care is reunification with their biological families. And so when that is not possible, the courts will ultimately decide that they want to create an adoption plan for these children. Most children who are available for adoption in the foster care adoption are over the age of 10 years old. In the United States, there are 100,000 children legally free for adoption, and there are about 3,000 here in Pennsylvania, and there's a huge need for adoptive families to care for these children who have no family to call their own. One of the interesting caveats of foster care adoption is there's no financial cost to the adoptive family to do the foster care adoption. As wards of the state of Pennsylvania, in this case, would pay for the adoption process. Please note, I said there's no financial cost. There are immense emotional costs to doing foster care adoption. So while it may have that limited financial cost, there are other costs that do come involved with it. Just like Christ's adoption of us, there were costs to that as well. All adoption costs, all adoption hurts, all adoption has pain. And so that's foster care adoption. A lot of these kids have a severe special need. They might be part of a sibling group. If they are healthy, physically healthy, they may have an emotional health need as well. So there's different scenarios that can take place in the foster care adoption. And then the third primary kind of adoption that Bethany Christian Services provides is our intercountry adoption. We work with about 13 to 15 different countries at any given time to create these adoption plans for our families. And the intercountry adoption is typically a very long process. It has a higher financial cost. You're working with not just one government, but two governments. So anybody who's ever had any interaction with our local government knows how stressful and frustrating that can possibly be as governments change things and they have all sorts of fine print. And so the intercountry adoption each country has their own set of criterias that they require. Some are you have to be 30 years old, some are you can't be over 35 years old, some you can't have biological children, some you need to have experience with children. So there's all sorts of different criteria with each of the different countries. And we at Bethany have information meetings, and we spell out these 3 different programs very in detail. And we have a chart of all the different countries and kind of what the criteria are for each country, so you can make an informed decision of which country you might go through or which adoption process you might decide to go through. One of the things that I like to point out is that God does not call all Christians to adoption. I'm sure that many of you know someone you hope and pray never adopts, and there are certainly families that was a joke, sorry. There's so many children in the U.S. and millions, 150 million orphans worldwide. Many of these kids need adoptive families. And the need is great. But not all of us are in a position to do it right now or ever. Or maybe we've passed that opportunity to be able to do it. But there are many ways in which you can care for the orphan. God calls us in James 1:27. He says, pure religion is this, to visit the widows and the orphans in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. That idea of the word visit, pure religion is this, to visit the widows and the orphans, that word sounds very basic in the English language. But in the original language which the Bible was written, that word is just packed with theological meaning. The idea there is very similar to the pastor's role to oversee the church. So we as believers have an opportunity and an obligation to visit the widows and the orphans, to care for them, just like the pastor is to care for the church. And that can look a whole lot of different ways, but it's not just with mere lip service. To care for the orphan goes deeper than that. What I would challenge you to do this evening is to sincerely pray about how God might have you care for the orphan. It may be caring for one of the families here that you are connected with. It may be that God would call you to do foster care or safe families for children or possibly even to adopt. And what I would challenge each of us in this room this evening to do is to pray about it. If you aren't sure about moving forward with one of these bigger steps, certainly come in and figure out some ways that you can be involved in caring for orphans on a smaller scale. That could be praying for an orphan. One of the lines in the video this evening was, and all of a sudden that picture became not a picture. She became a girl. And to me, that's what it's all about. There's 150 million orphans. We can't even comprehend that. That's half the population of the United States. But you know what I find interesting about that is all 150 million of them, they're not just a number, they're not just a statistic, they're not just a name, they're not just a line. They are real individuals, real human beings created in God's likeness with likes and dislikes, with friends and other children who are not their friends. These kids have emotions. They have needs. Some of them are going to sleep tonight starving, literally. Some of them don't have a bed to sleep on. Some of them may be in an orphanage, and they haven't had a single adult interaction where someone has physically touched them and given them a hug today. These children are real, and these children desperately need love. And they desperately need a family to call their own. And these children, even more importantly than that, desperately need to know Jesus as their personal Savior. So what I challenge each of us in here tonight to consider is, how can I be involved in caring for one child? Just one. We'll go ahead and turn it back over to David this evening, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here this evening. I have these booklets on the table in the fellowship hall. They have all of our programs at Bethany Christian Services in them. I'd be glad to get you more information about any one of them.
Well, I'll be very, very brief. That is the first big part. The next part that we have for you guys tonight is we have a ton of desserts, so please come over to the fellowship hall and eat some of the great stuff that a lot of people have made. And myself and my wife and the Muirs and the Cruzes will have tables set up. And these are all three very different kinds of adoptions. We have 2 different countries, 2 different international adoptions, as well as a domestic/international adoption that my wife and I have with Abby and her birth parents. And so that is an open adoption. And it's something that was really hard for me to hear about, was the open adoption. And so if you're really thinking about doing an adoption and you're curious about this open adoption thing, is Catherine and I, you couldn't find 2 bigger advocates for it. And we were definitely not in favor of it before we looked to do adoption. So with that, and just something else that I thought was kind of interesting about tonight. Today, this Sunday in particular, is Orphan Sunday, which I wasn't aware of. Myself and both Andrew and I both thought it was next week, not this week, but it happens to be that this week is Orphan Sunday. So a special day in particular to pray for the orphans. November is National Adoption Month, and so that's why we wanted to do this in November. We have just been so blessed by having Abby in our family, as the Cruzes have with their daughter and the Muirs have with their daughter. And if you guys are interested in this, we'd love to talk to you more about it. And Andrew will be there as well, so once I get done praying, if you wouldn't mind coming over to the fellowship hall, grab some food at least, and if you have questions, please feel free to talk to us. You'll see us at our tables. Yes, my love. I can't read lips. Oh, the donation. Yes, thank you. Sorry, I'm terrible at reading lips. In the back, you will see 2 chairs with baskets on top. We were doing a love offering tonight. All the money will go to Bethany Christian Services to help them with what they do around the world with meeting the needs of the different orphans and the different families that need support. So I believe that is it. Yes, that is it. So let me pray now, and then we'll be dismissed. Lord God, I thank you for your goodness and your faithfulness. I thank you that of those 150 million, every one of them is known by you. You know who they are, Lord. You feel their pain. You love them. You care about them. And I pray, God, that you would bring families into their lives that would choose to make them part of their own family. Lord, I pray that more importantly that you'd move in their little hearts, that they might come to know you and make you Lord of their lives. God, we trust you. We thank you for your goodness. I thank you for each of these girls and the blessing that they've been to our families and to our church family. Help us now to be more like you. In your name, amen.